Hello creatives, I'm Joanna Penn from thecreativepenn.com, and today I'm talking about how to find and work with a book cover designer. Because let's face it, people do judge a book by its cover, so you want the best possible cover for your book. And if you're self-publishing, you do have to go through this process, because designing your own book cover is a bit of a no-no unless you have some book design chops, which, let's face it, most of us don't. So let's start with, how do you actually find a designer? Well, the first thing is to look at books that you like, preferably by other indie authors, because most of us will credit our book cover designers inside the cover. So you can use the look inside function on Amazon, and it should be listing the book cover designer or in the acknowledgements of other books that you like. So that's one idea. The second one is thebookdesigner.com, which every month has ebook cover design awards, and they are fantastic for having a look at what's going on in the design space. And you can also get designers from there as well, because you want designers that will resonate with your genre. And then of course you can ask other authors, and I have my own curated list at thecreativepenn.com/book cover design, and there are lots of vetted and recommended book cover designers there. So once you've found a designer that you like the look of, the next thing to do is to discuss with them how you're going to work together, and also things like price. Now, many people ask about price, and it's really going to depend on what you're asking for. For example, lots of book cover designers do off-the-shelf covers, and sometimes they may work, and they can be like $100. That can go all the way up to, I would expect you to be paying around sort of $400, $500, and then that can go up much higher if you want custom artwork, which some authors love investing in, particularly fantasy sci-fi authors, getting interesting creatures and spaceships designed. So it will really depend on what you're looking for in your cover, but you'll need to discuss that up front with the designer. Very important. You also need to discuss the number of iterations that are allowed in the design process. So today I'm going to take you through the process of Map of Shadows. My designer is J.D. Smith Design, the fantastic Jane, and she's worked on most of my fiction and non-fiction covers now, and we have a well worked out process. But because this was the first in a new series, we went through a number of iterations which I'll show you. But the process will be the same whether you're writing fiction or non-fiction. So once you've engaged a designer, the first thing to tell them is, of course, the name of the book. Now that might sound obvious, but of course Map of Shadows originally was actually just called The Map Book for most of the time I was writing it. So you will get your cover design in advance. So if you don't know the exact title, that's fine, you can start the design process, but much better to have a fixed title. You'll obviously also need your author name, which again might sound simple, but that is something that people change. So I went to Jane with Map of Shadows, a Map Walker novel, and J.F. Penn as my author name. Now, J.F. Penn specifically, I have a brand, a thriller brand around that, so it already has connotations of a darker feeling than my non-fiction design, but very important to give the designer that up front. And then also some indication of genre. So I said up front, this is a dark fantasy, urban fantasy feeling, so she knew what kind of category in the bookstore it would be. Now this is very important because a cover will give a really strong indication of what the genre is. So here's two examples on the screen now of two very different genres, and I like these two covers. I think they're great examples of the genre. So one, you have Rock Hard Neighbor. I'm pretty sure you can guess what type of book this is, but the naked torso of an attractive man and the wording of the title there obviously implies this is some kind of erotica, and I think it's a very good example of the genre. On the other hand, we have High Performance Habits by Brendan Burchard, which is a non-fiction self-help inspirational book, and a lot of non-fiction have very strong textual elements, and in fact this only has very strong textual elements. So it's important to go with examples of the different covers that you want the designer to consider. So of course you can send over lots of different examples, and that's basically what I did with Map of Shadows, because when it's a new series you might not have an exact clue, and of course the designer is not going to read your book. That's a very important point. I find some people assume that the designer is going to read it, but they won't. So of course you will have also sent them your back blurb, but what I tend to do is actually pull out the elements that are important, that I want to resonate. So I sent over a couple of different things. First of all, these dark fantasy elements and examples of covers within the kind of strong female protagonist urban dark fantasy niche. And then I also sent over some what I called elemental covers, which are some of the books I've read in the same feeling of fantasy, where they're actually using individual elements in the book cover instead of a person. So I really couldn't decide which one I wanted, because I still actually, you know, am getting to know the series, and I will come back to rebranding towards the end of this video. But you can see from the elements that I gave to Jane that I wasn't clear. So I also, when I write, I collect images on Pinterest. So I sent my Pinterest board, and here are some of the images that I sent her there, and also this image of a compass and a map. Those were elements that were very important. It's called Map of Shadows, and it's the Map Walker series, and the magical element is that my characters can walk through maps, which is cool. So then your designer is going to come back with a number of iterations of cover design for you. And on the screen now, you can see these are some of the things that Jane came back with, and they are a combination of the elements that I'd asked for in these two quite different design styles, one with a female protagonist and the other with more of a single element. They also have a mix of fonts. Now, this is a new series, so we might be using a different font for this series than we are for the other ones. So when I got this first iteration, this is where it can be very difficult, because often we don't know what we want, and it's very important to respect the designer and their knowledge of design elements instead of forcing yourself onto them, because they often will know a lot better than you, and an idea you might have in your mind might not actually match the good design elements of your genre. So definitely work with the designer. So you'll get that first iteration, and then you have to go back to them with feedback, and I suggest that the feedback is not start again. The feedback is specific. So for example, I like the font of B, but I like the map of E, and I like this element of that, or make that color darker, change the font to this, or, you know, the font needs to be more shaped, or, you know, go back with very specific feedback on different elements of the design. Now, I decided there were two covers that I actually liked, but I really didn't know which one I preferred, and so I decided to ask my audience. So if you do already have an audience, or even just people on Twitter or people on Facebook you could ask, then this is the image that I put up on social media, which has two quite different images, and then I asked people to vote A or B. Now again, these are pretty different covers. You know, the first one does have that elemental aspect and could be a much more broader fantasy book, and the one B with the female protagonist is very much fitting within a certain genre in urban fantasy. So I put that out there, and again, it was a very mixed reaction, but the people who read my JF Penn books really came back on A with the map and the compass, because my books often tend to be cross-genre, and that's the one they resonated with. But that wasn't enough, because I felt that although I really liked A, it didn't quite have enough supernatural elements, and which this clearly has a magic system. It looked a bit too historical, and also I preferred the font on the second one. So I went back, and this is the second round of iteration that I got from Jane. So from that final iteration, we came up with this cover, which is almost exactly the E2 cover, and I'm really thrilled with it. I love it. It feels exactly right. But you can see that we went through quite an iterative process to get there. So working with this number of iterations iterations, this was 2 major iterations, is completely normal, but that's why you need to discuss with the designer up front what the expectations are on both sides. Now, I've heard, I know a lot of designers, I know a lot of authors, and I've heard kind of nightmare stories from either side. So you want a great designer who you can work with long term, especially if this is going to be a career for you, like I found Jane, and we work together really well. And in fact, sometimes she just reads my mind and does a perfect cover first time that matches exactly what was in my head. So that's amazing, and that's developed over time, but that's why you have to respect the designer. I've also heard of nightmare situations where clients have just said no, 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 and never been happy, and they've changed their specifications later in the process. So big tip here, if you want to work with a fantastic cover designer, you need to pick one that works in your genre, you need to pick one that has good testimonials from other authors, you need to decide up front how many iterations you're going to do and how you will work together. I would also suggest paying your designer. So I pay on invoice. I'm not even going to wait. I'm just like, yes, I'm going to pay you right now. I love paying the people who do work for me, who do fantastic work for me. So that's really important too. If you want a long-term relationship with any professional, whether it's a graphic designer, book cover designer, editor, website person, you need to be as good a client as they are service provider. Another thing to consider is, will this be a series of books? Because you can often get a designer to design a series look, and then the subsequent books may be cheaper, or at least they'll be easier for the process. So now we've done that once for Map of Shadows, the next book in the series will have a similar look and feel and the same fonts, so we won't have to go through such an iterative process. We did the same for Penny Appleton, so you can see the images on the screen. The author name, same font, very clear, and the design elements of the English village, the happy couple, you know, exactly the same on every book. So all we have to do is switch out the different images. And I have the same for my non-fiction. You can see there the different, the single element, the same fonts, and that is the same across all of my non-fiction books, and Jane did those as well. You can also get the font name and the colour palette so that you can use the same images, the same colours, the same fonts across your website, your social media. Really good to kind of get the whole package designed. And you will see authors who have book covers that are all over the shop. Often that's when they move different publishers. But if you are in control of your covers, then why wouldn't you have a very clear author brand per author name? And I think I do across JF Penn, Joanna Penn and Penny Appleton, and Jane has really been instrumental in making a very clear branding for each author name. I also get my Facebook ads done at the same time. So here's an example of Map of Shadows, and I generally get my ebook cover done first, and then I get my print book cover done later, because you need the spine size, and you can only do the spine size once you know how many pages are in the book. So you have to kind of finish the book before you can do the print design. Of course, you can get different types of covers for ebook versus print book. For example, the pull quotes that people get, blurbs from other authors, often don't look very good on a thumbnail size image, say a black and white image on a Kindle Paperwhite, or even on an iPad. You know, they're very, very small. But in a print book that's, you know, comes by post, or you get in a bookstore, the pull quote will look pretty good, or there can be stickers or other things. So you can design differently for print and for ebook, and of course audiobook will be different again because it's square. So you might need to work with the same designer for multiple different types of covers. And then finally, what about changing covers? Maybe you're listening to this and you're going, oh dear, I need to rebrand my covers, or maybe they're just old. I mean, many of us have been writing for a long time and we need to update our covers. So I'm kind of constantly doing this, actually, looking at my covers, looking at how they could be better. So my first 3 novels originally had different titles. You can see them on the screen here. This is the original 3, Pentecost, Prophecy and Exodus. Now, I have a master's degree in theology, and I grew up with Christian fiction with demons and things flying around, Frank Peretti and people like that. So I wrote novels that were kind of Dan Brown meets Lara Croft, religious conspiracy thrillers, and my titles and covers very much resonated with the Christian fiction market, but actually these books are not Christian fiction. So when I realised after writing a number of them that they were actually action-adventure thrillers, still conspiracy thrillers based on aspects of theology, but more Dan Brown action-adventure than anything else. So I rebranded, recovered, so they have different titles, but you can see the covers. Stone of Fire, Crypt of Bone, Ark of Blood are very different to the original covers. Now, the same books, different covers, different branding, very much more colourful, alive, and resonate with the genre of action-adventure thriller. You can see the running people demonstrating, you know, a nick of time, must save the world type of approach. And then Desecration, my London psychic crime thriller series, which is a trilogy, went through 3 iterations of covers. Now this is probably my most cross-genre series in that I meant to write a British detective, female protagonist crime novel, very straight, and then amazingly a psychic character crept in, so there is a supernatural element, as there is in all of my books. So we started off, and the first book, Desecration, has a theme of human anatomy, so you can see the beautiful design there by Derek Murphy, who did many of my earlier books. Beautiful design, and I still love it, and I still have one of those special edition early print runs of Desecration. Then I realised, as I started to discover what the book actually was, that it needed to be a dark cover to resonate with my brand. The white background was my non-fiction brand, not my fiction brand. So we went with the darker cover with the woman with the gun, and then I decided actually the gun was not necessary and I should get rid of that, and went with Jane did this final design with the woman and London, and the other books in the series resonate with that image design. So don't worry, you can update your covers later. You don't need to do new ISBNs or anything when you're just changing the cover. You can just upload a new file and it will be out there, which is very exciting. Okay, so I hope you found that useful, and now you know how to find and work with a book cover designer. And of course you can find all my links at thecreativepenn.com/book cover design. So I'll be back next week with more tips on writing and business, so subscribe to the channel, and please do leave your comments and questions and suggestions for future videos below. So happy writing, and I'll see you next time.